You ever notice how every election somehow ends up feeling like a fight over a completely different issue? One year it's immigration, another year is critical race theory, then it's transgender athletes or bathrooms, then it's DEI, then it's whether someone's a communist. The topics keep changing, but the feeling doesn't. The outrage and language feels familiar. Even some of the slogans feel familiar, and that's because a lot of what we're watching actually isn't new, it's updated. So tonight, I don't want to spend our time arguing about whether you should support one politician over another. We can do that after the primaries. I want to show you something I think is much more interesting, because once you see it, you start to recognize it everywhere. What's going on, everybody? I'm DeAntony Collins, and this is The Quiet Loud, where we don't just talk about what's happening. We connect the dots behind why it's happening. And if you've been watching politics over the last few months, you probably have noticed something, that the rhetoric has gotten hotter. Words like communist, socialist, anti-American, and enemy seem to be showing up more often. And at the same time, debates over immigration, schools, books, and identity have become central campaign issues again as the country moves toward the 2026 midterm elections. Now, those stories matter, but tonight, I want to ask you a different question. Where did this playbook even come from? Because when you start tracing these ideas backward instead of just reacting to today's headlines, you realize something, that American politics has a very long memory. So let's start with probably the most recognizable political slogan of the last decade. And if your mind instantly went to change we can believe in, I said the last decade. All right. So if I asked you to name the slogan most associated with Donald Trump, almost everybody would answer the same way: Make America Great Again. Or MAGA, as it has infamously become. It's become one of the most recognizable political brands in modern American history. He built an entire movement around it. Millions of hats, shirts, signs, and rallies later. It's difficult to imagine American politics without those four words, and I can't wait to get back to a time where we don't hear them again. But here's the part a lot of people don't know. Donald Trump didn't come up with it.
Let us pledge to each other, with this great lady looking on, that we can, and so help us God, we will make America great again. Thank you very much.
In 1980, Ronald Reagan campaigned using the phrase, "Let's make America great again." Now, I want to pause for a second because this isn't about giving Reagan credit or celebrating his presidency. I would never do that. Okay. Reagan remains one of the most polarizing presidents in modern American history. Supporters point to his economic agenda, his role in the final years of the Cold War, and his optimistic vision of America. But critics point to his policies that widened inequality, weakened organized labor, and accelerated mass incarceration through the war on drugs, and reshaped government in ways that are still being debated today. All right. But that's not really what tonight's story is about. All right. The important point is that Reagan understood something politically powerful. In 1980, Americans were frustrated. Inflation had been painfully high. Interest rates were crushing families trying to buy homes, and the country was dealing with the Iran hostage crisis. Iran, huh? There was a growing sense that America had lost confidence in itself, and Reagan didn't create those frustrations. He gave them a slogan. That's different. Successful political slogans don't survive by 40 years on accident. They survive because they tap into something bigger than one election. Now think about those words again for a moment. Make America great again. All right? There's no policy in that sentence. No legislation, no budget proposals, no executive orders. It's just a feeling, nostalgia. Remember, they were talking about vibes in a very pejorative way in 2024, but that's exactly what MAGA is. It invites all those voters to fill in the blank for themselves. Most of it racism. All right. For one person, great again might mean cheaper groceries. For someone else, it might mean stronger manufacturing. For another person, it might mean traditional values. Everybody hears something slightly different. I hear racist. Okay. That's one reason the slogan has been so durable. When Donald Trump adopted MAGA decades later, he wasn't simply reviving those four words. He was reviving an emotional frame that had already proven politically effective. And once you notice that, another question starts to emerge. If the slogan wasn't new, what else wasn't new? All right. That brings us to something that I think gets misunderstood all the time. People often talk about the culture wars as if Donald Trump woke up one morning and just invented them. He didn't. That was another thing he picked up and used. The arguments themselves are much older than even he is. Long before social media and cable news, America was already wrestling with questions about race, religion, gender, education, immigration, and who gets to define what it means to be an American. The civil rights movement forced the country to confront segregation and voting rights. The women's movement challenged long-standing assumptions about equality in work and family. The LGBTQ rights movement pushed America into new conversations about identity, marriage, and civil rights. Every one of these movements changed the country. Every one of them also produced their own political backlash. That is the point that I'm getting to, because the backlash wasn't an accident. It became a part of the politics, red meat for the Republican base. Okay. And those social changes accelerated through the 60s and the 70s. Conservative religious organizations became increasingly active in electoral politics. Issues like abortion and prayer in school and the role of religion in public became central organizing themes.
Friends, this election is about more than who gets what. It is about who we are. It is about what we believe and what we stand for as Americans. There is a religious war going on in this country. It is a cultural war as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself, for this war is for the soul of America. And in that struggle for the soul of America, Clinton and Clinton are on the other side, and George Bush is on our side.
By the early 1990s, people had started putting a name on these conflicts. And at the 1992 Republican National Convention, conservative commentator Pat Buchanan stood before a national audience and declared that America was fighting for what he called a religious war, a cultural war. That's one of the moments that helped popularize the phrase culture war in American politics. Again, the conflicts already existed. Buchanan gave them a label. Doesn't that sound familiar? Reagan didn't invent frustration, he gave it a slogan. Buchanan didn't invent cultural conflict, he gave it a political identity. And over time, that identity became increasingly powerful and another way to organize voters. If you guys can't hear the thunder happening outside my window, there's a terrible storm that just kicked off. Apologies for that. I'm just gonna keep on going, all right? So yeah, it was a powerful way to organize their voters. Like I said, it was red meat to the base. Now fast forward to today and think about the issues dominating campaign speeches and cable television and social media. We're talking about immigration and DEI. They're banning books. We're talking about classroom curriculum and what they're teaching the students now, transgender athletes and bathrooms and pronouns, flags. These aren't random topics, y'all. These are issues that touch identity, values, and our sense of belonging. And that's why they generate so much emotion. So they use them as wedges. Now, let me be clear about something. Saying these issues are politically useful is not the same thing as saying that they aren't important. They are important. People genuinely care about them. Families genuinely care what their children learn in schools. All right. They care about how their children fare in sports. All right. Communities care about how immigration is handled. These aren't fake concerns. They're real. Absolutely real. The question I'm asking is different. Why do some issues become the center of national politics while others don't? Because America spends weeks arguing over cultural controversy, and other conversations quietly move into the background. Stuff like housing and healthcare, childcare, prescription drug prices, our national debt. These stories don't disappear. They just receive less attention. And that's worth thinking about, because politics isn't only about what leaders choose to talk about. It's also about what they don't talk about. It's about what matters to us, the voter, what will be healthy for our nation. Which brings us to something we've been hearing a lot more about over the last few months. A word many Americans thought we left back in the Cold War, and that word is communist. Over the last few weeks, you probably noticed something. That the word communist is showing up over and over again. Not in documentaries about the Cold War, not in conversations about the Soviet Union, but in campaign speeches. During his July 3rd speech at Mount Rushmore, Trump warned that America was facing what he described as a renewed communist threat, using that language to characterize Democrats and progressive political movements. Now, before we go any further, let's separate two very different questions. One question is whether that accusation is true. It's not. I mean, that's more of a political debate, but we know it's not. The question I'm asking tonight is different. Why is this language back? Why is it returned? Because words have histories, and this particular word carries a lot of history.
And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, there could still be one communist too many.
In February of 1950, Senator Joseph McCarthy stood before an audience in Wheeling, West Virginia, and claimed that he possessed a list of 205 communists working inside of our State Department. Now, the number changed frequently. The evidence never materialized, but the accusation survived anyway. Sound familiar? Within a few years, suspicion had spread far beyond Washington. Government workers were investigated, military personnel came under scrutiny, teachers, professors, Hollywood writers, actors, ordinary citizens. Some people lost careers that they never got back. This period of time became known as McCarthyism, and not because everyone was actually a communist, but because accusations themselves became the political weapon. That distinction it matters. We're seeing it right now. McCarthyism wasn't defined by proving guilt. It became known for creating suspicion first and demanding people prove their innocence afterward. Does that sound familiar? Now, history isn't completely copy and paste. Donald Trump isn't Joe McCarthy. The Cold War is over, and America is in 2026, not in 1950. Those are important distinctions. We have made progress, but political strategies don't have to be identical for history to teach us something. Sometimes what survives isn't the person, it's the method. And the method is finding a word powerful enough that once people hear it, they stop debating policy and they start questioning loyalty. And that's why historians still study McCarthyism. Not because they expect another Red Scare, which looks like Trump is trying to scare one up right now, but because they understand how political language shapes public perception. Whether the word is communist, socialist, or the enemy from within, which we have heard him use all of those when talking about politicians he doesn't like, when talking about the news media, when talking about people who don't generally agree with him, all right? The labels themselves become part of the campaign, and that's why paying attention to political language matters. Words don't just describe reality. Sometimes they're designed to shape it. Remember birtherism? Remember Barack Obama, the accusation that he wasn't born in this country, stirred up a mess that lasted throughout his presidency. Trump was at the hand of that. Okay? They're designed to shape the message, and that's exactly why this story belongs in tonight's episode, because once you recognize the language, you start recognizing the playbook. Remember, Donald Trump said he was bringing in 16, then 17, 18, we up to 19, I think $20 trillion he said he brought in for other countries. We have not seen dime one. Remember all the money that was supposed to be coming in from Doge, tariffs? We haven't seen dime one. We haven't seen any evidence of any election fraud from 2020. That was over 6 years ago, and we have not seen any of it. Recognize the playbook, y'all. All right? This is the part where I think history becomes useful, not because history predicts the future. It doesn't. History gives us context. It often rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. As America moves toward the 2026 midterm elections, every campaign is trying to answer the same question. What conversation gives us the best chance at winning? I'm sure that's true whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, an independent candidate, even running for city council or a dog catcher. All right, campaigns make choices. They decide what to emphasize, what to respond to, what to ignore. Some candidates lead with the economy. Others come out with immigration. Some focus on healthcare, others on crime and education. That's politics. But history suggests something else. When the country is anxious, whether that be economically, culturally, or internationally, messages built around identity, belonging, national purpose often become especially powerful. That doesn't mean voters stop caring about grocery prices or housing or healthcare. They don't. It means campaigns are competing to define what voters think is most important. So they give you that red meat. That's why understanding the playbook matters. Not so you can memorize history, so you can recognize it when it's being fed to you, because once you know where a political strategy came from, you can evaluate it on its own merits instead of accepting it simply because it's familiar. And maybe that's tonight's real lesson. The slogan wasn't new. The culture wars weren't new. Calling political opponents communists isn't new. The technology has changed. The way we do media has changed. The people have changed some, but many of the political strategies have stayed on, all right? Not because they're inevitable, but because they worked. And whether they work again, that's not a decision history gets to make. That's a decision we, as the voters, get to make, all right? One of the reasons I started The Quiet Loud is because I got tired of politics feeling like a collection of disconnected headlines. Every day was another controversy, another speech, another argument. And somewhere along the way, it became easy to forget that none of these stories exist in isolation. History leaves fingerprints. Sometimes they're glaringly obvious, and sometimes they're buried beneath the decades of new faces and new technology, but they're in there. And if tonight's episode did one thing for you, I hope it reminded you that understanding history isn't about living in the past, it's about recognizing patterns right here in the present. Because informed citizens don't just ask what happened. They ask, have we seen this before? If you found this episode valuable at all, please like, subscribe if you haven't. Share it with someone who enjoys learning the story behind the story. And as always, I'm going to ask you to stay grounded, stay informed, and stay loud quietly. This is The Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.